Hey, how's it going? Keith Morgan here for TechTarot.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at how to texture the desk that Corwin made back in January. And so what we're going to do is learn how to do some basic UV unwrapping for rigid structures. That'll be using the project from view method, and that'll just maintain the proper spacing in the actual matrix of your mesh and make us have to do a little less guesswork. So the look we're going to be going for is something like this image I will put up right now. So you can see we'll have a wooden veneer with some paneling that is done in a basic glossy black, much like your standard IKEA furniture, which I'm sure we all love to build. But trust me, Corwin showed that it is a lot easier to make a desk in Blender than from IKEA, and I will show you that it is just as nice looking as one you will buy from IKEA. So let us jump right into it. So as you can see, we have the desk here, and we will provide this model online for you. If you check the links in the description on YouTube or on our website, you can find a download link for this specific model for you all to start from. And as you can see, we have this. I've added a floor, and we're going to be using cycles to texture this. But first we need to unwrap the thing. So to first unwrap it, we have to think about the kinds of materials we're going to be using. So that way we can unwrap only the specific areas that we're actually going to need to texture with an image. The ones that we use procedurally through nodes in cycles, we will not need to unwrap. So we're going to go ahead and be using two different textures. As we can see here, we have a plywood texture, and that'll be for the underside of the desk, where you can see the particle board that the actual really expensive piece of furniture you bought is made out of. And secondly, we will also be using a fine wood grain, and that'll be used for the veneer on top of the desk. So with that said, let us go unwrapping this thing. So Cycles supports only like one set of UV coordinates per map, per se, and I know that might be a little weird to comprehend at first, but basically if you unwrap one thing and you go and use a texture, for example, we have a square, perfect square for our texture here, and we unwrap it, and we unwrap everything to those proportions, then if we go and apply a texture with an image of a different aspect ratio, such as this one, the aspect ratio of the entire unwrapped image will be skewed, and so we won't get exactly what we want. So what we have to do is set up two different UV maps. So to do that, I'm gonna hide our floor. We'll tab back into our desk here. If we go over here to the Object Data tab, we can see we have a drop down here for UV maps. We're gonna add two. We're gonna call the first one wood, and we'll call the second one particle for the particle board. So we'll do the particle board first to just get it out of the way. But basically we'll want to select every single face that'll have the particle board on it. So if we just hit Control-7, go to our bottom view, we can see we have all these bottom faces that will likely be just strictly particle board. So we're going to go ahead and we'll select all of these. You can use your favorite selection method. I'm going to alternate between shift right clicking and circle select. We'll just grab all these faces. Yeah. Okay, and we'll grab these ones along the bottom. Like that. And assuming your desk isn't going to be that nice, we'll also grab this one face under here, because you know they don't make it nice everywhere, you can see. So we have all those faces. Oh, we have to grab these three right here. And so we have that. So those will be the ones that end up looking like particle board. So what we can do is hit Control-7, and once again with our particle UV map selected, we will go ahead and drag out and select UV image editor. And you can see that's just what our desk looked like before without any textures. So we'll just hit the X here to get a blank UV map. and we'll go ahead and we'll open an image, and we will go and navigate to our texture. Now I grabbed this from cgtextures.com, and it is plywood new 48_5. And so with that loaded up, we can, and by the way, this is a tileable texture, which is really good if you gonna have a large area like this. But anyways, we're gonna take what we have selected here. We're gonna hit U to bring up our unwrap menu, and we'll hit project from view, and then so that will perfectly project those bottom faces where we need them. And then from here we can just go ahead and scale it up, and because it's a tileable texture, it shouldn't look too bad. And you know, we just want to scale it so that our flecks of wood here are in the proper scale to our desk, so we'll just approximate that. Looks pretty nice. Okay, so that was the easier part. Before we go ahead and unwrap the wood, we'll go ahead and assign the texture or the actual materials to the specific surfaces, so we know specifically which faces we have to unwrap and which ones we don't for the veneer. And this all comes down to personal preference on how you want your desk to look. So we'll go to our material tab, and we'll make 3 materials. Call the first one black paneling, and that'll be our procedural texture made with nodes. And we'll just in the settings, we'll change the viewport color to a dark gray so we can differentiate. We will call our second one veneer, and that'll be the actual wooden surface, and we'll make that an orangey red. And then our last one we will call particle. For our particle board, we'll make that a yellow, something like that. Okay, so now we will tab back into edit mode, and we will go ahead assigning such faces. Now, since we already have all of our particle board faces still selected, we can go ahead and just assign them right as it sits, and you can see it already looks pretty disgusting. So you know, we could call the tutorial right here, but I suppose some of you want wood, so I guess we will continue going about that. So we have to make some executive decisions now about which faces actually end up getting veneered. So we'll say the top surface of this shelf will, the one drawer face right here will. Yeah, we'll just assign these and go about our business. Whoop. Veneer assign, and we'll grab that. Deselect all the faces we don't need. And you can always switch into perspective and orthographic, just toggling with 5 on your number pad to get into those crannies you can't see. And just select, like I'm saying, all the faces you want veneer to be on. And then that'll make it easier for us to see which faces we only have to unwrap for that texture. So we'll grab these, and we'll assign that. Make sure we have our veneer selected, hit assign. Okay, and then we'll grab this one piece right there. Make sure we're on veneer, hit assign. Okay, and that looks pretty well correct. So what we can do now is we're going to go over to our object data tab, and we will click on wood now so we can start editing those UV maps. And we'll just hit the X on this image, and we'll go ahead and open, we navigate, and we'll grab another texture from CG Textures. This one is Woodfine 003. So we have that. So we'll do the easier faces first. We'll grab this one right here and this one, and if we hit 7, make sure we're in orthographic. You can just hit U and project these from view as well, just because they're straight on. And we'll scale them to a nice scale, rotate them 90 degrees. And we'll just move them over. Okay, so we can get some variety with how that's looking. And maybe we'll scale these up a bit more. Move that one back over. And I'm going to take this moment to save, just so we don't lose all this progress. And so we have those two faces unwrapped. Now we have to go about another method for unwrapping, which is known as marking seams. And what that will do is allow us to use another method of unwrapping so that we can, in a sense, put score lines on your mesh that it will break up the map into. So you'll have multiple islands for this one chunk. So to do that, we'll go into edge select mode, and we will just go ahead and mark the seam around the edge here. This isn't entirely necessary. You can get away with this next step just using the project from view method. You would just have to have multiple steps. But it also makes it easier to select parts of your mesh later. So with that outline selected, we will go over here and we will hit mark seam. And you can see it's now turned a different color, showing that it has been marked. And we will do the same along the bottom here. And I just realized that we could also put veneer on this underside, so we will go and add that in a moment, or rather particle board on the underside. But it is completely up to your preference. So with that also selected, we can hit mark seam. So basically what that will do, if I just go into face select mode, if we grab one face and we hit L, it will grab all the faces up to the seam lines. So that's also where it can be handy to mark your seams if you just want to be able to select whole areas quicker. So you can see, it can be pretty handy to select all those without having to go around and deselect ones you don't want and stuff like that. But likewise, I'm just going to go back to our particle UV map, and with this area selected, and we will go ahead and reopen our particle board texture. We'll just make sure we have all those faces selected. Good. Hit Control 7 to go to our bottom view. Hit U, project from view, and we'll scale it up. If we hit AA, we can get it approximately to the right scale of everything else. Yeah, something like that. Okay. So back to our wood UV map. We have this top face. If we hit L, hit 7, we can project it from view, and just make sure we open up our texture. And we'll just project from view again, just to make sure we got it right. We will align the grain this way as well, scale it up. And if you notice, it actually is shorter than it is here. Blender sometimes changes the aspect ratio based off of what the aspect ratio of the image you're unwrapping to is. So we'll just scale it on the x-axis to approximate that back. And we'll scale it up again a bit. And we'll hit AA, and we'll see how it looks in comparison to the shelf underneath it. Yeah, it's quite large. So we'll scale it back down. A bit more maybe. Scale it down. Maybe we'll rotate it 180. And offset some of these so it doesn't look too repeating. And we will save again. Okay, so we have that top face unwrapped. Now we can do this side part. If we hit or select one face and hit L, we'll grab just that element. And if we go hit U and then unwrap, you can see it unwrapped it fairly well. Some of the faces, aren't in the proper proportion. You can see. I'll just scale it up on the Y so you can really see what's going on here. But this big face right here is this face right here, and in proportion to the lengths of these other ones, it's a little bit too short, just very slightly too short. So what we can do is grab just those center vertices and just scale them on the X. And then we'll grab everything and we'll scale it all together. And we will reduce its size on the Y again, just so we get something looking like that. It should work pretty well. And likewise, we can go ahead and we'll just grab that. We will mark the seam, and then we will grab this bottom edge, mark the seam, and then to properly unwrap it, we'll need to have one more score line so that it has a place to separate all of the edges so it's not a loop. And so we'll grab just this one of these back corners just so you can't see the join, and we'll hit mark seam again. And if we go to face select mode, we can grab one face of this part, hit 7, hit U to unwrap, or sorry, project from view. And like you can see what I'm talking about when it changes the aspect ratio of the UV maps in comparison to the actual mesh. So we'll just go over here, we'll scale it on the Y axis, and we'll scale it up so that it's an approximate scale with everything else. Maybe offset it again. And what's nice about making a fake desk, especially like this, is the veneer is already a tiling texture that the plants produce themselves. So if anything, instead of repeating making it look less realistic, it might make it actually look more realistic. So that's always a good outcome of that. So then our second last thing to unwrap here is this border here. So with it selected, we'll just hit unwrap, and you can see here it's got this long strip. And sometimes when you use just the basic unwrap, it'll curve your straight lines. So to get by that, you can always rescale them. So with just like the bottom edge selected, you can go ahead and scale it on the Y-axis to 0. And then you can do the same on the top, scale Y 0, just hitting S to scale. And so we have that. And if you notice here, especially if it's, if you're having a hard time trying to judge the scale of everything based on what you see over here, you do have a few helpers. Like if you notice here, we have slight perfect squares, and here they're overly stretched on the x-axis. So what we can do is just scale it down on the x-axis till these are looking more square-like. And we get something like that. And then we will just scale it all up as well so that it gets a proper scale. And then we'll hit AA over here to select the entire mesh just so we can see what everything looks like in proper scale and see if we need to do any tweaking. And it looks like we do. So especially with this last piece we just did, we'll just hit it, grab it. And if you're only able to grab one face at a time, you can either select this element button, so you select the entire island, or if you're in face select, if you just have one face selected of it and you hit L, it'll grab the entire, all of the linked faces for that piece. So I'm just looking here at the width of these. Those correspond to the width of these squares. So if we just scale this up, we'll move it over just so we can reference it. That's approximate. And we'll call that pretty well close. Maybe we'll scale it on the x-axis a bit down, and we'll just move it over. You could take a little more time to get a bit more perfect if you wanted, and actually I'm noticing that yeah, this line should go around the entire perimeter of this box, so we'll have to scale it a bit more. But you know what, for now that should work. So if we need to tweak it after, we will. But like I said, for now that should suffice for our needs. So the last thing we have to unwrap is this piece right here. And it's a little more tricky, as it's not just one face, it's a face with 4 faces surrounding it. But it being a box shape, if we just tried to unwrap it, it would be quite messy. So we have to mark the seams here on the corners, right there. So that seam, and then the one on the boundary of both materials. So if we just go ahead and select those, and this might be where it's helpful to go on the perspective, just so you can move around a little more freely and really get in there to see what you're doing. And so just grab this last one, and let's make sure we don't have anything extra selected, and we do, so we'll just deselect those, and that looks correct. So with those selected, we will mark our seam, and then we'll go into face select mode, hit L to grab just that element, and then we will hit U and unwrap it. And as you can see, because we marked those corners, we got this nice effect where it split them and splayed them open so we can actually use them properly. But this, if we go back to orthographic, and you can see our our drawer is too short, so we'll scale it up on the y-axis. And if you want to scale these tabs so that they're proper scale, go about it. You won't really notice the stretching if there is any in that area. So it's all a matter of what you feel like you can get away with. But yes, so we have that all unwrapped. So now I will save, and we will go about setting up the materials. So up until now, you could do all of this in Blender Internal as well, but we're going to be using cycles to finish the job. So I will go ahead and change our timeline to a node editor, and go over to our material panel. And if you're using 6.7 or newer, depending on when you're watching this video, I don't know if they fix this in a newer build or not, but by default, when you're using materials in cycles, it used to default to the material nodes when you went to the node editor, but now you have to click this little button down here to show the material nodes. I hope they change that back soon. It's just nice to not have to keep looking around for things. But anyways, so if we hit T, also added in 6.7, we have these handy node tabs on the side, so we don't have to keep hitting Shift A rather to go to our add menu or go down here. We can just access them from here. Sometimes it's still faster to use Shift A menu, but for if you're doing a lot of things in one area, good to just grab them from here. Before I start setting up this, I'm going to go ahead and load up a environment map. So I'm going to go to the World tab. Under Surface, we're going to hit Use Nodes. Under Color, we're going to hit this tab, choose Environment Texture. We're just going to go ahead and navigate to a image. I will provide a link to the one in the description. I grabbed it from Creative Commons on Flickr. And make sure it's set to equal rectangular, etc., etc. So if we go ahead and switch to our rendered viewport and we go to perspective, you can see the environment we have it set in. It's a nice city block, because nothing says IKEA desk like a city block. So there's that. You can see it's rendering, like it's part of the scene with the proper lighting of that scene. And just to make sure that we're not getting any extra lighting, we're just going to go ahead and delete the default point lamp. And we'll go back to rendered so we can see what we're doing. But with our desk selected, we'll go ahead now and start setting up these materials. So for the black paneling, we're going to have a slightly glossy black material that will also reflect some of the material, the environment, which will be useful. So we're going to go ahead and add a mix shader node, and we'll just drop that in. And we're also going to grab a glossy shader, and we will just feed that into the bottom. And this is the veneer here. If we just go ahead and set the one on the glossy, or for the mix shader, you can see that this part's really glossy and it's starting to reflect a lot of the environment. And if I drop the roughness to 0, it's a perfect mirror, and it's kind of crazy. If you want that, by all means. But we're going to go ahead and drop this to a really low value, something like a 0.05 even. We'll see. And we'll leave the roughness to about a 0.075, and we'll tweak that from there if we need. And I'll just drag this over so we can see a bit more what we're doing. Now that we have everything unwrapped, we don't really need this, so I'll just close it. But we're going to change the diffuse color to a black, or maybe we'll lift it a little bit from there. But you can see here, especially, we're starting to get the gloss, and it's making it look pretty nice. And by putting the roughness on, you're not going to get those perfect reflections. You're going to get this nice diffusion of the reflections, which is what that roughened veneer paneling would look like to some extent. So we can tweak that later if we want, but for now we'll say that's a pretty good material. So next, the veneer material will involve a little more setup. We're going to go ahead and add a mix shader as well. We're going to add another glossy shader. Feed that into the bottom. Now, usually when you use unwrapping and you only have the one image map, you would only need, or you wouldn't have to worry about this, and you would just use a standard texture coordinate and feed in the UV into your the UV coordinate into your image texture. But because we have two different UV maps, we can't use this method, so we'll get rid of that node. What we need instead is a node called an attribute node, and then we have to type in the name of the UV map we want to use, and so it's case sensitive and everything, so you have to be careful what you do and make sure you're not changing the names willy-nilly. But we have our wood one right there. Oh, I cap lock on, sorry. Wood. So that'll grab the UV information for that those coordinates we set up. And then we'll grab an image texture and we'll feed the vector into the vector of the image texture. And we'll go ahead and we'll open our wood vine. We'll feed that into the color of the diffuse. And you can see if we drop the factor to 0 on the mix shader, you can see we got this nice unwrapped wooden texture on our desk. And like I said, if you don't like the scaling on this, you can go ahead and change the scaling on your UV coordinates. I think it's fine for now. It's a little squeezed, but we'll worry about that another time. But what you can do now is we'll bring back some of the gloss, and we'll also drop it to about a 0.1 on the roughness, and it looks like a really glossy desk there. If you don't want your desk to look so glossy, you just bump the roughness up. But that's starting to look pretty good. And even though the veneer is technically like a paper on top of like particle board or whatever, if you still want it to have like a small amount of bump map, you can extract it from the image texture. So to do that, we'll just move some of this around, and we will go ahead and add a converter math node, change its type to multiply, and if we feed the color into the top and then the value into the displacement of the output, you can see we're getting this. Let me put some more sampling up for you so you can actually see what we're doing. We'll go to 50. But you can see it's like looking really rough, so that's where the multiply node comes in. And so this is just like a regular like math, like half it, times it by 2, whatever you want to do. If we did set it to 2, you get a crazy amount of bump. But for our needs, I think a 0.05, too subtle, 0.1. Sure. Yeah, and even that might be a little bit much for a veneer, so maybe drop it back to 0.075 or something like that. Yeah, it's really subtle. If I drop the roughness on the glossy to 0, you'll see it affecting a bit more. So it just adds to the realisticness of how the light diffuses on the surface and other sort of stuff of that awesome nature. So we have that part all nice and textured. All we have to do now is go and select our particle board and do approximately the same thing. Now particle board is pretty diffuse, so we won't go ahead and add we won't do the glossy shader on this one, but we'll add another attribute node, and this time we'll change its name just to verify. We name that one particle, so we'll put particle in here. And we'll go ahead and add a image texture, grab our plywood, feed the vector into the vector of the image, feed the color of the image into the color of the diffuse node, and as you can see, we now have this particle board on the bottom, and it's looking pretty nice. But this stuff actually is rough, so this is where you'll want to add bump quite a bit, noticeable amount. So we'll go ahead and add another converter math node, and you can find the math node under converter over here, or Shift A to bring up the add menu, or under here as well if you want to use that old method. But we'll change it to multiply as well. We'll feed the texture into the top node, and we'll feed that output into the displacement. And if we just zoom in here, especially under here, you can see how rough this is looking. Now, the stuff is rough, but you don't want it to look as rough as it would pierce your knees if you were sitting underneath it. So we'll go ahead and drop this value to about a 0.3, just so it's subtle enough to make it look like it's rough. But like I said, not as rough as to make you get gangrenous legs over it. So, that's looking pretty good. So we'll just hit Alt-H to unhide our floor. And if you wanna do something fancy with this, go ahead. I'm just gonna go and we'll add a checker texture. Feed that into the diffuse. Make this black. We'll add a mix shader. Throw on a glossy shader to mix into that. And we'll put the roughness to like a 0.05, something really, even less than that, 0.02, something glossy. And I'll put the roughness, or the factor. We might even drop the roughness to 0. No, 0.01. Yeah, something like that. And you got yourself a pretty fancy looking desk sitting in this street. So we'll crank up our samples here on the render to 200 probably is more than enough. There's our camera. We'll hit F12 to render, and just get some proper settings here. Under performance, we'll set our tile size if you're using a GPU to 256 by 256. If you're using CPU to render in cycles, leave it at 64. We'll whatever, 100%, hit render, and there you can see we have a really nice looking desk. Now, you're probably wondering, well, why do we texture the particle board if you're not going to see it? Well, if you're going for realism and you never really know what's going to be seen, you put it there, and if it gets seen, it gets seen, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. But you have this desk as an asset now, so it's always textured and primed for whatever it needs to be in. You could add some metal knobs and stuff like that if you want to do that. You just use procedural, glossy, and isotropic shaders, whatever you feel like, and just go about the same. So I hope you learned how to do some basic UV and W unwrapping, and we'll have more. We'll surely have more texturing tutorials like this in the future. I hope you guys are getting comfortable with nodes and stuff like that. Like I said, we will provide the desk texture on the website, and we'll provide a link to it in the description. I'll also provide a link to the images used, so you guys can follow along with that. And for that, this is Keith Morgan for Tech Tarot, signing off.